Hey, thank you everyone for joining us. I am Tom Christie. I'm here with David and John, and we're going to talk first about campaign planning, and then we'll throw in a little bit of discussion about the OGL developments at the end of this discussion. So I'm showing here on the screen the Dungeon Master's Guide, first edition, and we often think of the first edition D&D as just being dungeon crawl after dungeon crawl, but right in the first DMG, in the ongoing campaign section, which is from page 112 of the DMG, they talk about how dungeon levels and wilderness castle crawls can grow stale and how you need to have something, some purpose to it all. And that's what we're talking about, developing a campaign and the purposes behind the campaign. Interestingly, they also go on to talk about in here, or Gygax does, about moments of relief as well. So you don't necessarily have to have your campaign laser focused the whole way through. You can throw in a little bit extra here. I got some pictures of these adventures he talks about. He talks about an Alice in Wonderland adventure, which came out some years later as Dungeon Land. And then there was an extension to that adventure. And these are available on Drive-Thru RPG. There was an extension to that adventure called The Land Beyond the Magic Mirror. And I actually played both of these adventures back when they came out. I forget what year that was. And then he also released Isle of the Ape. And I played that adventure when it came out. And that was like a gateway off of Castle Greyhawk led to that world. So I'll come back to the first edition DMG here. Now, in the first edition DMG, there's also a section where it talks about having only a meaningful campaign if you strictly track time and have one game day equals one day in the campaign. And that was like a West Marches style campaign, the first of those types of campaigns, where Gary had a lot of players, and they would come over to his house every day, and they'd play every day, and he would have to pare down how many were playing, and he would do that by, your character went to go learn a new language, so you're out for 50 real days. So that's interesting. Now, he obviously said that doesn't work well if people want to play and they can't because of that time constraint. So you can have other characters, or you can just, hand wave stuff as needed. But that was what he was dealing with so many players. And that's in page 37 of the DMG. I don't have a picture of it here. Anyway, that's an intro. Campaign planning is a thing, has always been a thing from the very start. And Dave, why don't you take it over?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this topic lately because I've gone back to the game store where I run a Wednesday game every Wednesday. And unlike in throughout the 5th edition era, this is the first time I'm not running something from one of the hardcover books. So I'm finding myself putting together these games, from my own imagination. Yeah, shocking, right? And it's been something it's a challenge for me that I haven't dealt with in a long time. So this led me to try and look at some of the resources that I've collected over the years for campaign planning and how people approach these weekly games for their players. One of the first things that I uncovered was something that appeared in a issue of Dragon magazine, one of the online only issues, number 429. And that was an article by Dave Chalker, who talked about something he called the 5x5 method. And what he's doing is he's taking 5 major quests and each with 5 steps and creating a table of 25 adventures. Now, I'm awed by the amount of planning that goes into creating something like this. But first of all, I'm too impatient to do that much work in advance. And second of all, with my setting of doing this sort of planning in a game store where there can be a lot of turnover in players from week to week, it just wouldn't pay off to do that much work in advance. If you're the sort of person who can pull this off, wow, I'm impressed, but it certainly isn't something that would work for me, especially in this situation. A second thing that I looked at was a video by somebody named Tom Lommel, who used to have this persona he called the Dungeon Master, which was like the old style killer DM. He retired that because he kind of felt that even though it was sort of a caricature, he even thought he thought that was a bad archetype to model for the game. Anyway, his method was called plot radar, and what he'd do is he'd look ahead to his next games and his upcoming games, and he'd kind of design like the radar showing things that are near, further, and further out. He'd look at that and break it down into the plot threads. So he'd have one column of immediate things that were probably going to happen in this game coming up, and then he'd have plot threads that were approaching 2 to 3 sessions out, distant and dangling, not in play. You really need to see the video to see how this works out. But it was interesting seeing the video because he applies his method for the Sunless Citadel, which is actually something in one of our hardcover books and that I ran for 5th edition. So it was nice seeing how his method really focused on setting things up in advance for future sessions. But with the plot radar technique, what I think is the missing link that he doesn't talk about is how you communicate these upcoming, approaching, and distant threads to your players. And that's what brings me to the sort of engine of campaign planning that I've been relying on that's worked really well for me so far. And that's sort of an adaptation of what Mike Shea, the lazy DM, uses, secrets and clues. What he suggests is coming up with 10 secrets and clues for your players to uncover during the next session. You don't necessarily need for them to uncover them all, but during the session, you pick and choose which ones you want to come up with. And I think there's a lot of magic in this technique because I can think of what my villains are doing, and those might be the things further out on the plot radar, but you've got to communicate those things to the players. You've got to set them up, and the secrets and clues are the ways you communicate what's going on in the game world to your players. And eventually these secrets and clues turn into, our own familiar friend hooks, which actually call people to action to do things, or they send the adventure off into a new direction. So by planning for these secret and clues in advance, I've got sort of the pieces and parts that not only set up upcoming events in the adventure, but they send the adventure forward with leads and hooks. What I really like about this is they preview things that are coming up. They give players a sample of where the game could go and sort of a menu of things that they can choose from. You can see what hooks, secrets, and clues are interesting to them as you preview them, and then you can send the campaign going in that direction. They give a hint of activity beyond the party, what your villains might be up to, what else is going on in the game world, and give a sense of a bigger world. And when your players are ready to act, they turn into hooks. So you can get them to move on to the next part of the adventure or to the next chapter of the campaign. So I've talked about this quite a while, and I'm going to throw it over to John or maybe Tom to see what your thoughts are on campaign planning.
I have one question before we go to John, and that's so secrets includes one thing we see in some really old TSR adventures is where they have that just unexplained room. Like in the Giant Adventures, they'll have the temples that you can find that are to some unknown god. And so just as Gygax talks about having just pure fun adventures, you can also, I think, have just pure mystery type things. And you as the DM don't know necessarily what they even mean or have to know what they even mean. So that's another way you can throw the secrets and clues in there. Does he talk about that at all? Just mysteries that
Yeah,
just
I
throw them in
think
and
there's a lot of fun in that
yeah.
because, one of the bits of magic here is you can dangle something that's just mysterious or unexplained. If you watch the TV show Lost, they became kind of masters of this, leaving threads that are unexplained and then, leaving it to the writers to figure out later what they mean, if they mean anything. Some of that depends on what gains traction with what the players are interested in. Hopefully, you can have a payoff in the end if things prove interesting and deserve follow-up. Or maybe they're just a puzzle that's fun and interesting and gets left in the wake of the campaign.
All right. Thanks, David. Go ahead, John.
That actually that is a decent segue into sort of my style and the stuff I'm used to doing. My planning tends to be a little bit more improvisational, but that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of planning that goes into it. It's just a little bit more loose. But one of the things that I'm typically dealing with that's different from what David's talking about is I'm usually playing with a pretty consistent group of players, and I don't have a need to, find reasons to boot any of them from the table for a while or anything like that. So, I mean, I'm working with a group of players who are going to be there for a session 0, who are going to be there for the campaign, and are going to be there for the next campaign probably, and stuff like that, which I think gives me the freedom to try a lot of different things to make the players and their characters and their ideas for their characters part of the plan for the overall campaign. So my process usually starts with using some sort of tool to try and build for the players some relationships between them and some connection to ideas I have for the plot. I've got a couple of different ways that I've done that in the past. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, that's right. Well, I'll do it that way then. No, I just want to do a window. All right. So the first thing, this is my first recommendation, would be backstory cards, which you can get through DriveThru RPG. This is a set of cards that walks you through a process where you, as the game master, prepare a grid of story elements that will be important in the campaign. So 3 NPCs, 3 events, 3 groups, that sort of thing, maybe 3 items, that sort of thing. And then the players sit around the table and they go through a process of playing these cards. Each card gives them a relationship to one of the events or one of the other characters, the NPCs that we identified, also probably another one of the characters in the party. So even before they've made their character, we're starting to say, okay, character A has a relationship with character B that is based on this particular cataclysmic event that happened before the campaign. So in Dragonlance, like we've been talking about, the battle in the High Clerist's Tower, there might be 2 characters who have a relationship based on that. Maybe one saved the other from a draconian, or something else happened in that scene, and then they can build some relationship between themselves based on that. But also, now I've got some clues and some nuggets that I can bring forward in future campaign stuff that I'm doing based on that. Maybe that draconian isn't actually dead and he'll come back, and the 2 of them now have this special personal relationship with this particular NPC, that sort of challenge. So this is one way to do that. I've also played around with there's a board game and now also a card game version called Fiasco, which in itself is a lot of fun to play. But the first part of Fiasco takes a bunch of different character prompts and stuff like that, and plays out, the characters figuring out their relationships with each other, figuring out their relationships with the world, and they make some decisions in the process of figuring that stuff out to decide how they want to play from there. And that, again, gives us this sort of structured but collaborative story building start that then as the DM I can take from there and start building in the directions that they've been indicating to me. So I do those two sorts of things. More recently, I've been sticking to the backstory card stuff. And then I'll use a campaign management site and this is World Anvil, where I do a lot of tracking for my campaign. And I write session reports, and the players have their own notes. I also will do quick notes, and this is the public site for a particular NPC they've run into, that sort of thing. So I've just got a very rich site that they can reference. They can sit there on their phones and reference it in game. But they put background information into there. I've got some more motivated players who will start filling in their ends of the world a little bit. And then I can pull things out of that to try and riff on that and develop story as we go forward. When I reach a point where I'm feeling stuck, I go back to the player backstories and start looking for elements that we haven't used. And when you combine that with some of the stuff that we come up with just at the table, in that improvisational way, we can really create some interesting stuff that we hadn't really planned before. So, really minor magic items. I'm playing in an Eberron world, and we like the idea of having that sort of very low tech but prevalent low tech in the world. And so in the previous campaign, I created a bar towel that basically lets you cast the prestidigitation spell at will to clean. And so it was just this sort of magical cleaning things. And they stole a bunch of these towels from a tavern they were in. They carried them with them on adventures. They cleaned each other after every fight. It was just this ridiculous bit of business that they did over and over and over again. So that creating those sorts of opportunities, that's not a thing that your 5x5 plan or your secrets and plan gets you to. That is just a thing that happened at the table in that sort of weird moment. But you can hang on to those things and see how much fun you can have with those later on. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. But I'm a big fan of having a lot of seeds, a lot of little things that might turn into something else. And if they don't turn into something else, if it is just a loose end, then that was a red herring, and that was part of my plan.
Genius.
Yeah. So yeah. The freedom that I have working with a very consistent table is it lets me be a little bit more improvisational and rely on my players a bit for some of those creative ideas and seeds to build out the campaign.
What do you have prepared for a session?
For a session, I'll usually have, because I typically have a pretty good idea of where they're going to be going and what we're going to be doing, I'll have encounters prepared. I often will do things like have a library of a handful of maps that are appropriate to the setting of where they are, and a couple of encounters built out, people they might run into in different places. And so I can mix and map those. We play in Fantasy Grounds, and so that helps me do that a little bit. And in Fantasy Grounds, I can build an encounter and drop it into the combat tracker and onto the map if I have it prepared in 2 clicks. So I could even have the same map prepared for multiple encounters. So I can do a lot of that sort of thing. And even if I don't have the encounter placed on the map where they're going to go, I can do that pretty quickly. So I'll typically have that sort of next session's worth of possible encounters at least sketched out. And then I'll have a journal that I keep where I'm thinking about ideas of where things might go, mostly writing about how NPCs will probably respond to particular things that the players might do and what the NPCs' goals and values are, so that when I'm getting ready to improvise something for that NPC, it's rooted in who they are, what they know, and what they want to get out of their interaction with the PCs. So that level of preparation lets me be prepared but improvisational.
Yeah, I've traditionally been a very high prep DM or game master, and that sort of be prepared to improvise arrangement that you're describing is really inspirational to me. I think that can work really well if you've got to list some maps, some potential foes, some NPCs ready to go, some rumors,
one of the things,
messages, that kind of stuff, all that ready in a quiver.
Yeah, the virtual tabletop experience, especially we all went into that really heavy for COVID. The virtual tabletop really makes you feel like you need to do a lot of preparation. You want to have a really pretty map that really accurately represents that part of the world that you're trying to do. And you really want to have things very well planned out and really good tokens and really good things. Improvisation is obviously a lot easier at a physical table where I can throw down, a mini that isn't even the right mini. I'm famous for using little devil ducks at my table. Yep. But like you can put down anything to be a mini, soda caps or poker chips or whatever you need to put down. You can have a couple of notes on what a monster is going to be. Some systems make it easier than others, but you can really wing it in a way that is harder to do in a virtual tabletop. But once you accept the idea that both of those experiences are really fun, and you can let go of some of the virtual tabletops desire for really detailed maps, for example, you can really free yourself up to rely on simpler tools. So I use tablets, digital tablets and stuff like that to do quick drawings, just freehand. And then I can email those to myself and put them in. And so just as quickly as I could drawing on a piece of paper, and then 30 seconds for email process, I can get that into the fantasy grounds to run it for my game, which is just about as fast as getting out the white erase marker and just really quickly sketching a temple and saying, all right, you guys start at that end. So we give ourselves a lot of panic and stuff like that when we don't feel like we have the right maps and we're not really as prepared as we could be. But the tools are there for us to do those quick and dirty maps and rely on our players' imagination a little bit more. And the game is just as fun because really in the end, we get to make as many dick jokes as...
Either way, same amount of dick jokes.
Yes.
So I took some notes here about kind of a general outline. And step 0 is, your session 0, your intro, you're talking to your characters or your players, finding out what do they want to do? What kind of genre do they want to play in? What kind of characters do they want to play in? And this can go two ways, right? You can build it for them, or it can be like, build it and they will come. Now, if you're doing some sort of an organized play campaign, it's the latter because you don't know what all the players are, and there'll be all sorts of players. But you start out there, getting that kind of information, the genre you want, stuff like that. And then you can go right to the end and say, what's going to be the final challenge? They're going to stop a volcanic eruption. They're going to stop some great enemy. And the campaign doesn't have to be the campaign that goes all the way to 20th level or 30th level or whatever, system you're playing. This could be your campaign for your 5th level characters, 1 through 5. And then they'll start a new quote campaign, but you can do it with the same characters if you like. So you don't have to bite off more than you can chew. You can just kind of think of what the end is going to be, and then it can change too. If the players don't know what you picked and they start doing different things and you riff off of what they're doing, you can always change anything you're doing as you go. And then you want to know what the PC goals are so that you can interweave in those things, what the players want to get done. And then you come to the events, the mysteries, the adventures that form the campaign. And again, you don't have to have them all laid out at the start. You can definitely improvise as you go and then wrap it up with the finale. Any additions there to that outline?
Let me throw in one thing on the just sort of the planning and improvising and sort of thing. I like to have things in the campaign that I don't even know what they are yet.
Yeah.
So in my current campaign, they found the dead body of a paladin, or at least where a paladin had been killed The paladin I knew had been risen as a revenant and was still off pursuing the people who had killed her, and she was off doing that. But at the scene, they found a rag doll, and the rag doll, I decided, would help them find the revenant by pointing in the direction that the revenant was in, but would only do that when no one was looking. So the ragdoll would always position itself if no one was looking, pointing in the direction to go for the thing, but only if no one was looking. And so it took them a little while to figure that out. And by the time they figure it out, they realize that they can use it as a pointer, but they don't know what it's pointing to. And at the time, I did not have any idea of why it was doing that. It was like, oh, maybe some part of the magic that created the Revenant is also creating this. Cool, we'll go. But I don't know why, and it wasn't even clear to me at the time who the enemy was that had killed the paladin. I was just sort of letting story feel let me get to a place where I could make some choices later on for what would feel most satisfying at that point. And so now more magic has come in, and that ragdoll is able to be more active when people can look at her. We did a little side fun adventure where the ragdoll animated some other toys, and the toys ran around and did things instead of characters when I had just a couple of players instead of a full table. And then the toys actually rescued the main party at one point. And now that doll is going to become a familiar for one of the characters. But all of that came from having that one little, hey, I don't know what the heck this is, but it seems kind of fun. Let's throw it in. And I mean, there's a certain amount of like high wire act feeling from doing goofy stuff like that, but it can be really rewarding in the end. You just trust that you will find a place for this to fit later.
I'm going to bring up the 4th edition DMG, I think it is. Here it is. And it's got a section on campaigns, and it's got a definition of a campaign. Let's see if you think this is the right definition. Campaign is the story of the characters in your game. That's it. So really, it can change, it can morph, you can riff off of what what conspiracy theories they come up with are great for planning out the end of your campaign.
Mm-hmm.
That'll definitely help a lot. And let's see, that's the 4th edition DMG. Then we got the 5th edition DMG is a little different in how it's laid out. And it's not so much about talking about themes and stuff as it's talking about building your world up. So that's an aspect of it that can be pretty difficult if you're a brand new DM. So you don't need to, it talks about starting small and building out, and eventually it'll come down and talk about play style. But I think that's something you want to put up in front, talk about what you as a group like to do. And it doesn't talk a whole lot about the ending challenge, but it does talk about a lot about campaign events, any of which of these could be eventually the ending challenge, staving off some cataclysmic disaster, assault, invasion, anything like that. So that's what's in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and that's in chapter 1. In the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, it's in, they start small with encounters, then go to adventures, then go to campaigns. And so we're talking about campaigns. We might talk about adventures next, then encounters after that. Kind of go in the reverse order how they did that in 4th edition. And then one more thing I want to show in the 1st edition DMG, they talk about, moments of relief. And I think you can also have just pure mysteries, or mysteries like you said, John, to you or to the players. And then they talk about, even going to different worlds and plugging in different campaigns, and how really the characters, and this goes to the 4th edition definition of a campaign, the characters are the campaign. So if you're okay as a DM doing crazy stuff like that, you can even go into different worlds. And there's different systems that can do that. D20, when it was 3rd edition, had all the different campaigns that you could just roll into. And if we look at Savage Worlds, is a good one for doing that. They have a lot of different settings that all use the same rules, basically. So there's another option that you can have for campaigns. Any closing words before we jump off into the OGL, David?
Well, I have one more question,
Yeah.
and I'm curious if either of you have any tips for aligning or connecting the campaign story with your players or characters' goals and objectives. This has been a goal of mine, and certainly at the game store with sort of lower player commitment, it's been especially hard to reach. But I've really wanted to tie the sort of plot in the imaginary hardcover of the game to the players, and I'm still trying to find ways to do that. So any suggestions on that?
I think that there's the bedrock of whatever you're doing there is really making sure that you know and that you're asking your players what their goals are. That seems like it's very easy to throw up a campaign and say, okay, we're going to play through this thing, and I've got some backstory, so I'm going to take this NPC from your backstory and drop them into this town, and now you're connected. But if you can find ways in social situations or whatever to have conversations about where a player would like to see their character go, or what sort of resolution you'd like to see for their story, it's a whole other level of thinking about character that gives you some stuff to try and work into the campaign. And frankly, some players will give you a lot more of that than others. I have a player who runs away every time he sees one of his backstory characters show up in the scene because he knows he's going to be the target of the next spell. So he flees from any story hooks I give him. And it's like, okay, I'm learning my lesson there. This player does not get story hooks so often. But, listen subtly to what they're telling you in, just sort of the stuff they tell you in their backstory about the sorts of things they want to see resolved, but have direct conversations with them about what would feel good and where they think things could go. And I think you can do that when you look at things, some actual play things that do a lot of role-playing stuff, like Critical Role. It's clear to me sometimes that those players have had conversations or have done some thinking on their own about what they want, what their character wants to get out of this session and what they're about to do. And so having those conversations with your players, trying to bring some of that, where none of us are ever going to run a game that looks like Critical Role. It's an entirely really different animal, but we can bring some ideas from that in and try and add some more story or character-based story to what we're running.
Yeah, I had Wild Beyond the Witchlight had a mechanic. Let me bring that up. That was let's see here. Find the adventure. Here we go. So this Wild Beyond the Witchlight adventure, your character lost something, or something was taken from them, and it's something important, like they lost their sense of humor, or they lost their sense of style, and they want to get it back. So it's somewhere in there, but that's not really their goal, right? That's just a goal that you gave them. So also, I had a player in this one, and it's really back to what you said, John. It's just listen to what your players want to do. I had a player that had a character in that adventure that was a prophet teller. It was a bard who could, give fortunes, and I started basically feeding that character plot stuff that was going to happen in the next adventure for them to give a card reading right at the start of the adventure that they could weave in, and it'd come true. So that was a fun thing to do with that adventure. But it's really just listen to your players, I think. Definitely.
Oh, Tom, you're so sly. I didn't realize that. That worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't share it with any of the players except the one player that was doing it every adventure. And it was like, wait a second. How did you know this was going to happen? And I wouldn't tell her anything specifically, that would ruin it for her. But I'd tell her some things she could say. So talking about also campaigns, and if you don't have the capability yourself to start your own campaign, you can definitely run a published one. And there's a couple examples here. This is Lost Mine of Phandelver, which is free right now on D&D Beyond if you have D&D Beyond. And it's, I think, a great little intro campaign. It's got a start, a middle, an end, and you can leap from it to a bigger campaign with the same characters if you like. You can just use it as a reference for how to do a campaign. What kind of mysteries can you reveal, and what kind of starting how can you launch the action off, and how can you get the characters invested to try and get to the end of the event, into the campaign. And then a couple of good ones that Wizards has done is, of course, Wild Beyond the Witchlight was a really great adventure, I thought. Then you had Curse of Strahd was a really great adventure. And Tomb of Annihilation, it had a mechanic in it that kind of drove the players to skip a lot of the adventure, unfortunately. If you go and look at some posts by Will Doyle, he's done some stuff regarding how he'd run it differently. And run differently, I think it's a really cool adventure. I was just reading some post somewhere. Oh, I think it was in the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. They're talking about the first super adventure being Dwellers of the Forbidden City, because it was a location that had multiple ways in, multiple ways to get to the goal. And of course, that plays a little part in Tomb of Annihilation. They brought that back for that.
So one thing you can throw in there is if you're taking a look at these campaign things, you may want to take just pieces and drop them into your campaign as well.
Yeah.
A lot of these, they're all built with a bunch of adventures within them. And I used the Forbidden City adventure standalone in the Eberron campaign I ran most recently. So just dropped it in, and the players discovered the city and wandered through it and then left.
Yeah, that's great for Eberron, right? That really fit well with Eberron. And then the last example is Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. And I think it's pretty fun adventure so far. And these adventures are all good examples of genre too. Like this one is an example of doing a campaign in a war. And Tomb of Annihilation is with a ticking clock, because everyone's dying out if they don't get to the end of this one. And it's exploration, and it's like old world, like dinosaurs and stuff like that. And then you have Curse of Strahd, which is horror, and you have Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is fairies and fae, and Lost Mines of Phandelver, I'd say, is kind of classic old school D&D type adventures. So that's it for campaign planning. You guys want to talk about the OGL for a little bit?
Sure.
All right. Let me bring up this great article that was done. This is an article done by Linda Kodega, and it's on IO9. And it talks about, she got a copy of the leaked OGL. So this isn't final form OGL, but this was given to someone that was then given to her. And she goes through it and reviews it and shares some of the stuff of it. And in summary, what Wizards is doing, as they pretty much said, but kind of obliquely in their release on D&D Beyond about a couple weeks ago, there's going to be an OGL, and they're going to release an SRD, probably an SRD format for their OGL. It's going to be a new version of the OGL, and it's going to be for the 1D&D game or the 6e game. What they did not say is that they were going to go after version 1.0 and try and make it no longer authorized. Now, there's been some other lawyer types that have looked at the language of 1.0, and a thing I learned, and let's see, there's a good article here. Show this tab. This is by Noah Downs. So this is a good article by Noah Downs. It goes over the basics of some of the law terms that are in the original open game license. And one of them is that it says it's perpetual, which as a layman, I thought perpetual meant it was forever, would never go away. But turns out perpetual just means it has no built-in end date. What it should have said was irrevocable, and that would mean it could not be taken back. But it never says irrevocable. Now, there's other lawyers that have weighed in, and this lawyer does it as well, that says, well, it'll go to court. I mean, I'm sure if they push against with this version, and this is the version that comes out, Paizo will have to sue. There's no way Paizo can just say, well, we're shutting the doors. So it'll go to court, and there's hopefully a chance Paizo or the other 1.0 people will win, because there's statements on Wizards' website that says it is basically forever. And so the people have been led to believe it's forever. And there's a I forget what the legal term is. Both sides are getting something from it. So there's in consideration of is used in that. So Wizards is getting something from it. The people who publish, they're getting something from it. So it's harder for Wizards to revoke it in that case, some lawyers have said. So that's the situation. What they are doing basically with 1.1, so they're saying 1.0 is gone. 1.1 you have to sign up for. So you have to sign the dotted line, you're doing it. You have to report your income from it if you get over 50,000 in income in revenue. If you get over 750,000 in revenue, you have to report your income, and now you're going to be paying royalties on the revenue, not the profit, the revenue of 25%. Well, all the companies I've ever worked for struggle to get to 10% profit margin, not 20. They don't come close to 25%. And even if they did, that'd give them zero profit. So basically it's Wizards saying, well, if you make more than 750, you better not be using our product because you're just going to give us all your money and not be able to even pay your expenses. And so there's more to where a Kickstarter person has kind of vouched that this is real and that they said we saw it. And we tried to negotiate a better deal and we got down to 20%. So there's more backing that this is real, that this was really the draft that went out. So now the situation we're in is Wizards was supposed to release this on the 4th, according to what people have seen, and they haven't. So hopefully Wizards is having second thoughts, given the pushback. Will they go all the way back to going to keeping 1.0 out there, not trying to get rid of it? We'll see. But I think that's a summary of the situation. Dave, what thoughts do you have?
Well, there's a couple interesting points about this. I think that 25% royalty isn't something that we would consider something that's set in stone. I think Wizards probably considers that their opening offer, and I suspect they're going to the third-party publishers that they've already contacted under NDA in order to establish contracts that are signed that are, negotiated like most folks would negotiate, and give Wizards what they want, a piece of the pie from all these publishers that are, leveraging D&D compatibility, along with some sort of monetary arrangement. So I think this is sort of an opening offer. And I don't think their expectation is that most people that are making this kind of money off of OGL products are going to just pay up the 25%, which, as you say, Tom, would be ruinous. The big question here is how much does a publisher actually need the OGL to create stuff that's compatible with one D&D or any D&D product? And that's something that the courts would have to decide. And I suspect the last thing that Wizards of the Coast wants is for the courts to actually decide this issue, because it's fairly likely that the dispute would not go the way Wizards want. Back in the 4th edition days, Goodman Games created a line of 4th edition fantasy adventures that did not use the OGL, but everybody knew that they were compatible with 4th edition. Even before that, in 1984, Mayfair Games created unlicensed products suitable for advanced D&D. That's what it said on the cover. And predictably, TSR sued. This was in their days when they earned the nickname They Sue Regularly. But the court case didn't go the way that they were hoping. And it looked like they were going to lose. So what TSR opted to do was give Mayfair a royalty-free license to use their trademark and continue to do their products in certain, closely defined ways, so that the courts would not decide against TSR, and we wouldn't see a situation where there's a precedent that everyone could easily make similar products to Mayfair. But even if the third-party publishers don't need OGL to publish their stuff, there's been a lot of momentum over the last 20 years for virtually everything that's coming out that's boasting compatibility with D&D to use some form of the OGL. And the benefit of that is that it's certain. You can add this OGL sign up, and you can be pretty confident that you're legally protected from issues, and you'll be fine making money off your product, and you will avoid the sort of entanglements that Mayfair landed in so many years ago. So I think Hasbro's hoping that the bigger third-party publishers will strike licensing deals that give them a piece of the pie, prevent any sort of lawsuits. This might even extend to Paizo, and everyone's happy. Meanwhile, the vast majority of D&D creators who are just making a few bucks off of their releases for PDF on Drive-Thru-RPG or whatever won't have any reason to sue, because they're not making enough money to pass over the threshold.
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis, David. I'm sharing the Goodman Games tab you talked about there for 4th edition.
I always appreciate the history you dig up. Makes me feel like I haven't done my homework. Yeah, I think I think that what we're seeing in a lot of ways is Wizards trying to build an OGL that more closely creates or creates space for what they initially imagined the OGL would be used for, which is very small publications, very small sharing of ideas and adventures and stuff like that. And the big money makers, the Paizos, the Critical Roles, all the other folks who are making really big piles of money in derivative work, that wasn't something that the original OGL was even imagining could happen, because at that time nobody thought there was that kind of money to be made in this hobby.
Yeah, in the days that the OGL was drafted, the idea is that they could farm out all the money-losing products that support the system.
Yeah.
To the
suckers who would do it for nothing.
Yeah.
And then they did the same thing in 4th edition they're thinking about doing now, where they made they clamped down on the license, and they said, you can't do the old stuff, you only do the 4th edition stuff. And then someone said, well, we're going to have to go and use the old edition and do our own game. And that's when they found out you can make a lot of money.
The thing that, one of the things that I actually like about the preview that we're seeing, and this is, it's not going to be popular to say that there's anything about this that I like, but they're building into this OGL some intentional monitoring of content, and the way content upholds the values that D&D and the community have made so important. So acceptance of race and gender and lots of ability issues and stuff like that. That this is a place where we all get to imagine being heroes, and the heroes should look like us, whoever we are. And they're building that into the OGL in a way that hasn't been done before. And it's just interesting to see that kind of egalitarian thing baked into something that has this very mercenary business piece as well. It's like, were you guys in the same room?
Yeah. And that brings in something that's a little different too, in that you have to share your product with them, and they can, in theory, edit out things that are not aligned with what they want to see.
And so
that's a new aspect.
How many people is Wizards going to have to employ to
Right.
monitor content,
Right.
to audit and evaluate the earnings of all these companies. They're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to collect a few $100,000
Yeah.
and at the same time burn down the relationship with all these publishers. And it's
Well,
going to
yeah.
put so much drag on the third-party publishing industry waiting for those reviews from Wizards. It's going to be brutal.
Yeah. They can even do their Adventure League stuff on time. You
Right.
think they're going to do a third party's adventure in any reasonable, review time? And the sad thing is, I firmly believe they're making more money this way than they would the other way. I really don't think, there's jillions and jillions of products out there, and Paizo's taking a lot of money, but I don't know that they make a whole lot more money, and they're getting a lot of free advertising. They're getting a lot of people come on board, which are selling their core books. I firmly believe they're going to lose money and make everyone hate them. It's just amazing that they're doing it.
I think they sacrifice a whole lot of goodwill.
Hmm.
And I mean, D&D has always had this place at the opening of the funnel for the hobby,
Hmm.
where people learn to play D&D. I mean, most people, okay, Tom, I know you're different. You learned with Battletech, but most of us started with D&D and then started experimenting with other systems and stuff like that. And maybe another system suited our taste, and so we went off in that direction for a while or something like that. But D&D has always been the thing that lets you go to a new community and find people to play with. It has always been the easiest way to tell people what you're doing. I mean, even if I'm not playing D&D, I tell people, I'm not playing a D&D system. The easiest way to describe it to people I'm not playing with is, well, we're playing D&D.
Yeah.
That it's the Kleenex, it's the of this particular hobby, and what they're forcing people to do or pushing people to do is make those third-party products, make those other sorts of engagements in other game systems. And that's just going to fragment the hobby a little bit more. It's going to break up their place at the top of that funnel. And I mean, the big explosion of interest in D&D is largely thanks to a lot of the alternative media stuff that's been coming out, like Critical Role and Dimension 20 and a lot of the other podcasts and video shows and stuff like that about D&D, the PAX guys and their stuff. And all of that, if those start picking other systems to run their games in, since they're just using those games as a framework for improv, they could use anything. What's that going to do to this drive that is pushing people to try that? I want to try that. I want to try that. Well, if they're trying Savage Worlds or Fate, Wizards isn't getting any money out of them either.
Yeah, the worst thing that could happen for Wizards of the Coast is this product driving some of those streaming personalities and so on to adopt different games or create their own games and rob Wizards and D&D of the engine that's fueled so much of this growth.
Right. You just said
Yeah, and they're even, like I highlighted here, going after videos, virtual tabletops, VTT campaigns, computer games, novels, apps, graphic novels, music, songs, dances, and pantomime.
Yeah.
I saw it was on Twitter. Someone said, okay, who the fuck's been pantomiming without a license? So it's bad. And they've already they've been caught. They've been caught. Even if they were going to go not do this bad, everyone knows what they're thinking now. It's like someone else said on Twitter, if someone's about to stab you in the back and you catch them, are you going to turn your back on them again?
Yeah.
Probably not. So that's not good. It's really sad. And, it's all this whole, let's monetize more. Corporations in general, the people on top aren't D&D players anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The Hasbro CEO's not. They might have played once or twice with friends, but they're not now. And who's the head of Wizards? Is it? I can't remember their name. And then the new head of D&D all came from Microsoft.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate. But hopefully, business heads will prevail, and they'll see, wait, this is going to cost us money. It's not going to make us money. Everyone's against it. We got to roll this back and apologize and not do it again. But I'm not highly confident that'll happen. Any last words, Dave?
Well, a quick story that I think, shed some light on this. A lot of these claims that Wizards is making are really legally dodgy. We've already talked about how you probably don't need the OGL to publish stuff that's compatible with D&D. There's probably no way you can claim that the OGL could be invalidated because it's no longer authorized. But all that stuff would have to be determined in the courts. And I think that Wizards of the Coast really wants people to settle or forget about it without taking this to the courts. And that brings me to the story of Happy Birthday to You. That's the song that everybody sings at their birthday parties. And up until like 2016, 2017, Warner Brothers claimed that this song was their copyright. And they collected about $2 million a year in licensing fees for this song, so people could perform it in movies and whatever. What happened is that people either just paid the $10,000, $5,000 that they need to license the song for their movie, or they would skip using it, like in all those chain restaurants when it was your birthday and people would come up to clap their hands. But what nobody did was tackle Warner Brothers' super sketchy claims that they actually own the copyright, because Warner Brothers had $2 million a year at stake in the copyright on this song, and anyone else, well, pay him $5,000 and you can use it in your movie. And that stood up until like 2017, when the worst scenario happened for Warner Brothers, and a documentary film maker sued them for claiming that their copyright was invalid and they didn't need to pay the $1,000 license fee to get the song in their movie. The claims were struck down, the gravy train ended. But for so many years, just because it was safer, easier, and cheaper to pay up and make a deal to use the song, the company made a lot of money. And I think that's kind of a parallel of what Wizards of the Coast would like to see here. They've got a bunch of sketchy claims, but, who wants to take them to court? They've got Hasbro dollars, Hasbro lawyers. It's easier just to not use it or strike a deal, or use the OGL 2.0 as it stands for 1.1.
We got a question for you, Dave, here from Zafad. There was something on your Facebook about Disney using OGL. Can you talk about that?
I saw that. I think that might have been DM Dave and not me or somebody else.
Yeah.
But Disney apparently used OGL for a Knights of the Old Republic video game. So there was an amusing comment that theoretically, now that the OGL is invalid, all this Star Wars IP that maybe worth something is now free to use by Wizards of the Coast, because Wizards of the Coast have changed the OGL to grant the rights. Well, this is exactly the sort of legal entanglement that Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast does not want to engage in. So there's no way they'd pick a fight over that.
Yeah, and I think they're going to have a fight with Paizo if they do this. I mean, Paizo will have to fight back.
Yeah,
Paizo could just ignore it and keep going, and then get sued, and then fight the suit, or they can go to court and initiate the claim.
Yeah, so that's something for the lawyers to work out, I suppose.
Yeah. There's a potential class action suit out there too, and there's an awful lot of lawyers who play D&D.
There are a lot.
We know.
I know one. I've won a big campaign We might all have a lawyer in our campaign.
Yeah.
Wizards might have been off more than they can chew.
That's the thing to keep in mind with all of this stuff is we're gamers. One of the things we all do really well is break rules. If we don't like a rule, we're going to find a way around it. We are the weeds in the sidewalk, and they can, we might take our $100,000 publishing company, or sorry, $1 million publishing company, and break it 3 ways and make it to three $400,000 publishing companies and get under their radar.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a way, whatever they do, especially if we feel like they're being mercenary and not honoring the community that is built up around all of these things. And that, in the end, is what they're violating. Is not legal, but just our perceptions of our shared experience and our shared community around these games.
That's a good final thought.
We'll find a way.
We'll find a way. All right. Thanks, David. Thanks, John. And bye, everyone.
Bye, folks.